When I was around 10, I moved to London and started a new school. I felt alienated for the first few weeks and had no friends. On my walk to school, there was a paving stone somebody had spilt paint on. The shape created by the paint looked like the face of the devil, two horns, teeth, etc. I avoided stepping on the stone and would walk around it every day. One day, I thought, fuck it, and I stepped on this face. I can't explain what I felt like when I stepped on it, but the word powerful would be close description. So every day, I started stepping on the face on my walk to school and would sometimes stand on it for a few seconds and absorb some power. Then one day, I thought, hey, this devil guy is kind of cool. Maybe I'll pledge allegiance to it. So I stood on the stone for a few seconds and swore a kind of oath. Give me friendship and popularity, etc., and I'll be a follower. Over the next few weeks, I made friends and became popular. I kept up my morning ritual of stepping on this face for a few weeks, but eventually just forgot about it. Obviously, I didn't grow up to be a devil worshipper or anything. I've broken the oath that I pledged. Skip to 2022. The last 10 years of my life have been a living hell. Both parents died. 3 businesses failed. Several relationships in ruins. Best friend died. I could go on, but you get the point. None of the bad things have been my fault. They just happen. Shit seems to fall apart around me despite my best efforts and intentions. Pretty sure I'm cursed. I was 12 years old at the time this happened. It was the summer of 1984, and I was out of school for the season. And this particular day, my mum had to go out. She told me that she'd be back in about half an hour, and she left. After a few minutes, I realised I had to spend some time in the bathroom. I went to use the normal upstairs bathroom, but I realised at that moment that I had left my Archie comic in the downstairs bathroom. I deeply disliked the basement, and I seriously disliked the downstairs bathroom, but sometimes it was necessary to use it if someone else was in the other one. I decided that I would just run down to grab my comic and head back upstairs to do my business. I headed down the stairs on the run, but by the time I reached the bathroom, I realised that the need to go was so urgent that I had no time to make it back up the stairs. So I sat down in the bathroom after locking the door and made the best of it. Now this bathroom was small, and I do mean very small. When I sat on the toilet, the corner of the sink sat just above my left knee. If I stretched my arm out in front of me, I could touch the other side of the room where the shower stall curtain was. Directly to the right of me was the door, and I could easily touch the doorknob and the lock above the handle. The lock consisted of nothing more than a hook and eye deal, and wouldn't stand up to anyone pulling on it hard, as it would simply come out of the wall. But it was enough that if someone tried the door, it would give reasonable resistance, and then they would realise that the bathroom was already in use. Simple enough, and generally sufficient for what it was needed for. So when I went into the bathroom, even though no one was home at the time, I shut the door and slipped the metal hook into the eye, and thought nothing of it at the time. I quickly got lost in the world of Archie Andrews and the gang of characters that went to Riverdale High, until I heard a noise above me. I knew no one was home, but perhaps someone had come home while I was downstairs. I stopped reading and was listening intently when I heard the first heavy footsteps on the basement stairs. It was unusually loud and sounded like whomever it belonged to was very large and very, very heavy. I knew how many stairs there were, so as the heavy thudding on the stairs came slowly and deliberately closer, I counted. 1, 2, 8, 9, 14, 16. I thought I was scared by the time it reached the 3rd stair, but by the time it had reached the 10th stair, I could actually hear it and took my breath away. As it descended, the sound of rushing air and demonic laughter came floating down the stairs in the hallway, through the bathroom door, and into my very soul. I could hear it round the corner as it came to the bottom of the stairs and down the hallway towards me. I dropped the Archie book on the floor in a panic and grabbed the door handle as I realised it was now outside the bathroom door. I could hear the rushing wind and demonic laughter, and 1,000 demonic voices all at one time, jumbled together, and calling out my imminent death. I held onto the doorknob with all my might, as it began to twist and turn in my hands, as whatever was outside that door tried to get inside the bathroom with me. The door shook with the violent tugging from the other side, threatening to tear the door from the hinges. I thought ironically for a moment that it was a good thing that I was sitting on the toilet right then, because otherwise what was going so freely into the toilet would have been flowing down my legs. Time seemed to stretch on as the struggle continued. I battled with the creature on the other side of the door for possession of the doorknob, but I do not know for how long. It could have been only seconds, or it may have been hours. But for however long it was, the tears rushed down my cheeks and I screamed in terror the entire time. In a single moment, it just stopped, and I was by myself in the bathroom, still shrieking in terror at nothing. The noise was gone. The tugging and pulling of the door was over, and there was just nothing. I sat there shaking violently for what seemed like an eternity, not daring to let go of the doorknob lest whatever beast I had wrestled with was still on the other side of the door, silently waiting to hear me let go and breathe a sigh of relief, only to pounce and tear the door from its hinges. I didn't relax a single muscle until I heard my mom's footsteps above me and heard her call for me. I screamed to her that I was downstairs and to come down and help me. Mom came down after a few moments and asked if I was in the bathroom. I said yes, and that I'd be out in just a minute. I quickly cleaned up and hesitantly opened the door, hoping that it was really my sweet mother and not a horrible trick of some kind. But it really was my mom, and I threw myself into her arms, sobbing and trying to tell her what had happened. She looked at me skeptically and only said, "What's your blood sugar?" I said, "What?" Again, she said, "What's your blood sugar? When was the last time you checked it?" I had been diagnosed as a type 1 diabetic just 2 years before, and although I took great care of myself on my own, I still needed my parents' help from time to time. She obviously thought it was one of those times. I realized that once again, she didn't believe me, instead thinking that it must be my overactive imagination, and that it may have also been related to a low blood sugar or something of that sort. So I went upstairs and dutifully took my blood sugar for her. I don't remember what it was, but it wasn't too high or too low. But I was left with remaining sadness that my mother didn't believe what I had told her. It wasn't the first time odd things had happened, and it wouldn't be the last. But years later, and the way things turned out, she would believe me just fine. My family has had a history of hauntings, or living in haunted houses, for 4 generations now. The stories have been handed down from one generation to the next, with me being in the 3rd generation. I recall one story that my grandma used to tell me. The first time she told me, I thought it was funny, or at least part of it was funny. The older I got and the more I experienced the paranormal myself, the less funny it became. She told the story of how one night she was up later than everyone else in the house. As she put it, she was burning the midnight oil, which is exactly what they did back then. She was only a teenager, and since she was born in 1911, that would make it around 1925 or so that this happened. Electricity still wasn't available in rural Saskatchewan, then so the term burning the midnight oil was literal, because they used coal oil lamps to light their rooms at night. She said it was about midnight when she ran out of oil and she was wanting some more so she could continue reading her book. Her uncle lived a few miles away, and even though it was dark, she decided to ride her horse over the fields to his house to borrow some. She knew him to be someone who liked to stay up late just like she did. So she got on her horse bareback, still wearing her nightgown, and rode across the dry prairie fields to his home. When she got there, she said the house was brightly lit from within. She thought her aunt and uncle must have both been up late working on something important. Thinking she would play a prank on her uncle, she decided to ride her horse right up to the door, placing the horse's head directly in front of it. She thought it would be funny that when he opened the door, what would be there was the horse's head instead of a person. She giggled to herself, positioned the horse in front of the door, then leaned over and knocked. The house went completely dark in the blink of an eye. Today, that may not seem like it's that big of a deal, but back then, they were only working with coal oil lamps. From the amount of light that had been coming from within my grandmother's estimated, there had to be at least 10 or 12 coal oil lamps burning at the same time, all in different rooms. For all the lights to go out at exactly the same time, there would have to be the same amount of people inside as lamps, and they would all have to blow out the lamps at exactly the same moment. As she was pondering this thought, she noticed a glow on the front door as the moon hit metal. She took a closer look and realized that there was a padlock on the front door, on the outside. She said that her aunt and uncle only used the padlock on the outside of the door when they were going to be away for an extended period and wouldn't be back for a few days. She said that the hairs all over her body stood on end and she was scared to death. So she turned the horse around as fast as she could and raced away from the house and back home as fast as the horse could gallop. She said she told her uncle about it when he got back, and also others, but no one really believed her story. My mum has always had spirits and haunts in her life, most of them bad. They seemed to follow her right from childhood in every house she lived in. This is just one of those stories, but there are many. My mum and I were out shopping one day, and we ended up at a local thrift store. They had this deal where they showcased upcoming items behind a glass, and if you liked something, you had to come back for it the day that it would be going on sale. This was a big attraction because of course they showcased the best items they had donated to them. And on sale day, people were lined up at the door to be the first one to buy a coveted item. So we were looking at the items on display, and my mom pointed out a porcelain doll. A clown. I looked at it, and immediately my whole body shuddered and became goosebumps. I've always had a sixth sense, and this clown gave me a huge case of the willies. I told her it wasn't a good clown. My mom was completely enamored with it though. I warned her I got a bad feeling from it, and please don't buy it. 2 weeks later, I went to her house and I ended up on her back deck. Sitting on one of the deck chairs, there was that damn clown. I went inside and said, "Mom, how could you? I told you that thing gave me the creeps." She told me she was drawn to it, so the day it went on sale, she headed to the store early and stood in line. No one else seemed interested in it, so she took it as a sign she was meant to have it. I asked her why she was sitting outside. She said my nephew Jay was seriously weirded out by it, and he begged her to get rid of it. Jay has lived with his grandmother his entire life, and at that time, he was about 16 years old. I asked Jay about it, and he asked me if I liked it. I told him the truth. He said Mom wouldn't get rid of it, but did put it outside. He also said, "You sense there's something wrong with it too, right? Did you notice that no matter what direction you're looking at it from, it seems to be looking back at you?" That definitely had not gone unnoticed by me. Fast forward a week or so, I noticed the clown was no longer sitting in the chair outside, so I asked my mom about it. She said our entire family was hating it, so she got rid of it. I felt somewhat relieved that it was gone, but the house felt different. Being that she was touchy on the subject, I just dropped it. That wasn't the end of it though. My mom was also raising my niece Amy, who was just over a year old at the time. I would go over to visit, and Amy never wanted to be in her room. I would go in there to grab some toys, and she wouldn't walk over the threshold. She just stayed in the hallway, and when I asked her to help me take the toys to the living room, she would shake her head no. I just thought she was being that age and left it alone. Then she became suspicious of an antique wardrobe that sat in her room. When it was bedtime, I would take her in, and she would stare warily at it. Then she would look at me, put her finger over her lips and cryptically say, "Shh," and point to the wardrobe. She didn't want me to leave her in the room alone, so bedtime became difficult trying to rock her to sleep while she fussed. Another week passed, and my mom called and asked me to come over. I said sure and drove to her house. She said, "Something really scared me last night." She had been in bed for only about 5 minutes, laying on her side when she felt a heaviness descend behind her onto the bed. That tired feeling left her as she became hyper alert. She wasn't quite sure what to do and was trying to decide when a male body came up behind her and pressed himself with his erect penis into her back. It put its leg over her legs and an arm around her torso. She froze in fear, not quite knowing what to do and trying to comprehend what was going on. She knew she had locked all the doors just moments before heading to bed. Had someone come into the house with evil intent? She said she put her hand on the man's hand that was over her torso when her finger felt very long, pointy fingernails at the end of its 3 fingers and a thumb. She could feel breath on the back of her neck, and she knew it was waiting for her to make the next move. She struggled to get up, but it held her fast and wouldn't let her move. She knew she had to think quickly, and she mustered up her best pissed off voice and firmly said, "Let go of me." He just pressed in harder and held her tighter. Louder this time, with real anger in her voice, she said, "Get off me, you bastard." She kicked and struggled, and finally it let go of her. She jumped out of bed immediately, flicked on the light to find nothing but her empty bed. She looked on the other side of the bed, underneath it, and in the closet. She went through the house, checking her grandkids' rooms before looking into every closet and cranny in the house, only to find no one else there but her family, with the doors still locked from the inside. I was obviously shocked. I didn't know what to say. My mum has never been one to make up stories, so I had to believe her. I knew she hadn't dreamt it, but I also didn't understand why. But I'm also acutely aware that spirits seem to follow her and our entire family from house to house. Another week passed with odd things happening. There would be a mug placed on the kitchen counter to fill with coffee, but when Jay turned with the pot to fill it, it was no longer there. He would look around and finally find the mug down the hall in the bathroom. Amy also would not enter her room without an adult, then cower while pointing at the closet or wardrobe. There were constant oddities like that, but things finally came to a head one night. My mom called me in the morning and again and asked if I could come as soon as possible. She sounded quite frantic, so I headed over immediately. Amy was watching a kids program in the living room, so my mom could speak to me in the kitchen. She said something really bad had happened the night before. She was sitting in the living room getting Amy ready for bed when she heard a loud slam against the wall down the dark hallway where Amy's room was. They both became stiff and stared down towards her room. My mum said whatever it was coming down the hall towards them made a loud flapping sound that got louder the closer it got to them. My mom hugged Amy to her tightly as a pair of enormous black wings came barreling at them, then paused at the entrance to the stairs by the kitchen, pivoted, and loudly shrieked as it spiraled down the stairs into the basement. Stunned, my mom and Amy sat there for a moment, not moving or saying anything. Finally, Amy wriggled away from Grandma, cautiously made her way towards the stairs, and looked down. When Amy turned to Grandma, pointed down the stairs and whispered, "Shh," my mom all but lost it. Amy slept on the couch that night, while my mom slept in her easy chair. My mom was shaking by the end of the story, and she had tears in her eyes. She said to me, "I need you here because I have to do something important." She went down the hallway to Amy's room, and I heard the closet door open. When she came back cradling the clown doll in her arms, I swore at her. Amy saw the clown and ran to me frantically saying, "Shh, shh, shh," and was crying in fear. My mom said she needed to take the doll out front to throw it out. But first, she was going to smash that porcelain head to bits. When she went outside, Amy clung to me in tears. My mom knew Amy would need me when she went outside with the clown. Again and again, my mom slammed the clown's head against the pavement. But no matter how many times or how violently she did it, it wouldn't break. After many attempts to shatter the head failed, my mom defeatedly buried it in the garbage can that would be picked up the next day. She couldn't do anything else at that point, but just had it gone from her life. Later, I asked her why she had kept it. She said it just felt right buying it and she absolutely adored it, but the rest of us were creeped out by it, with good reason, obviously. She said she put it up at the top of Amy's closet one day when Amy was at daycare, and she had covered it so it wouldn't be seen when I went in there. I hadn't seen it, and neither did Amy, but I felt something was off in the house every time I went over. She had assured me it was gone, so I just trusted her. But Amy felt it too, and was scared by what resided not only in her closet, but also in the wardrobe. Jay felt it, and experienced strange things as well, but nothing compared to the black wings and the creature in my mum's bed. Needless to say, all the weird stuff stopped after that. My mum has always trusted my intuition, and hers was certainly off that day in the thrift shop. But I always say, we always choose what's familiar to us. When you live in a haunted house your whole life, that becomes your normal, however abnormal that may seem to others. And the normalcy my mum felt when she saw that damn clown felt good somehow, no matter how much the rest of us felt the evil it possessed. My girlfriend lives with her parents in a home that they built. Bear with me as I try to explain this. On the top level of her house, there are 4 rooms. Her parents' room, her bathroom, and a spare bedroom where her now deceased grandfather lived before he passed away a couple of years ago. Her house has always had weird vibes. Shadows that move across doors, people in the corner of your eye, and weird unexplained cold spots in random but consistent locations. All these things I have considered easy to write off, since I don't consider myself a skeptic, but I'm not anxious to go out looking for anything paranormal either. The way the top floor is laid out, you can see the spare bedroom doorway in her bathroom mirror if you keep the door ajar. In this case, it was. I was brushing my teeth while she was downstairs getting water for us two. Nothing unusual. I got an overwhelming sense that I was being watched. Something that happens in her house, but I've never felt anything quite like this. I stopped brushing and looked up, and there in the mirror was someone staring back at me from the spare bedroom door. I thought it was just my mind playing tricks on me, so I continued brushing and looked up a few seconds later, and he was still there. He was an older looking man in a flat cap and plaid pajamas. I turned to look over my shoulder, and there was absolutely no one in that doorway. After confirming with her that no one else was even on the same floor as me when this happened, I'm left with no idea of who this could be. I spoke to her mom the next day, and she claims her father never wore anything like that, and didn't quite match the description of what I saw either. I don't think she really believes me. I live with my mom and cats in a 2-story plus basement home, which we just recently moved into. Before this, we were living in a basement apartment, as it helped us to get back on our feet over the last year, after some pretty heavy stuff in the family. In most of the houses I lived in growing up, strange things happened in the majority of them. For example, a basketball randomly bouncing in my hallway in the early hours of the morning. But something about that basement apartment just kind of halted all of the strange activity happening at home. And this is when I started becoming more aware of the shadows, cold spots, and more at my girlfriend's house. In saying that, now in my new living situation, it seems that for some unknown reason, whatever has been following me around is back in full action. I'll list some of my experiences to make it easier to follow. Cupboards open here on their own, literally. You can shut them then leave the room for 30 seconds and they'll be open when you come back. My oven and stove light turn on by themselves all the time. I have a small fan on my nightstand that turns on by itself. The door to the basement will be closed in the morning, despite my mother and I never doing that, as the cat needs access to their litter boxes down there. I'm usually up later than Mom, so she will check the locks on the front and back door, and then I'll double check when I go to bed to make sure they're locked, just for both of them to be unlocked in the morning. Things go missing and reappear suddenly. For example, my mom has 2 Christmas ornaments that she absolutely loves. While we were decorating the tree this year, she hung the first one and the second one was nowhere to be found. When we both started looking for it, we were on the last bag of tree decorations that we store in clear plastic bags. She and I both looked for it in this bag when we were about 10 ornaments left in the bag. Not an overwhelming amount of them or anything, yet we both couldn't find it. After I explained the story to my girlfriend after she came over that night, I picked up the bag and sure enough, the ornament was in there. What has really started to startle me though is 2 things that happened to me within the last week or so. I was walking up the stairs to go to bed last week and something tugged on the back of my shirt, almost causing me to fall down the stairs. Then just 2 nights ago, I was laying on my phone playing some dumb games to try and sleep. And then all of a sudden, I just became completely still. I didn't know what was getting into me. I just had this overwhelming, anxious and fearful feeling. After about 30 seconds, I started feeling cold breaths on the back of my neck. I started to completely freak out at this point and just stayed still for about 5 minutes until suddenly the breathing stopped and all my negative feelings vanished like they were never there. Does anyone have any idea what this could be? Why would the activity stop in that particular house? And why is it back so strong in this new one? This happened to me a while back when I decided to go on another camping trip alone. I always like camping alone. There's something serene and sobering about being isolated in the middle of the wilderness, and I always found it relaxing. So I planned out what trail I was going to take, packed my camping gear in my rifle, and jumped in my truck. I get to this trail early in the morning and hike about 15 to 20 miles in until I find the right spot and head off the trail to find a place to put my tent up. I stumble upon this nice sized clearing and decide that it's a nice, beautiful spot to settle down. I'm exhausted at this point, but set up the tent at the southernmost edge of the clearing next to the tree line and manage to get a fire going. I roast some weenies and start to hear a sound in the distance underneath all the forest noise. It sounded like an animal, most likely a deer, with a lame leg, as it sounded like the animal was making a walking and dragging noise. I felt bad for the poor guy, but it was too far away and it was getting dark, so I couldn't really go find it and put it out of its misery. Think nothing of it after that and go about eating my food. After I eat, I douse the fire and crawl into my tent and insert myself into my sleeping bag. I decide that even in my exhausted and relaxed state, I can't go to sleep. So I pull out a book I brought with me and start to read by the light of my lamp. Hours go by and I hear that sound again, this time closer, right at the opposite side of the clearing. Surprised, I put my book down and listen to this animal walk and drag across the clearing towards my tent. It's really loud at this point, and it now sounds like the hooves are all being heavily planted, with the dragging noise following seconds after, like the deer is dragging something along. It makes it to about what I assume is the middle of the clearing and stops, and I hear nothing. No breathing, not a sound from this animal. I unzip the tent and look into the clearing, nothing but trees and darkness. What the fuck? Unnerved at this point, I zip the tent back up and sit there listening for other noises. Nothing, just the crickets and the breeze. I decided that there were a lot of strange noises in the woods and tried to not let it bother me. Besides, I had my rifle. I start to doze off when I hear men's laughter off in the distance to my right, then women's laughter and sticks snapping far off to my left. I'm up now, wondering if what I'm hearing is really what I'm hearing, or just a product of being half asleep. I hear more faint laughter from a couple other different directions, all different, and confirm that it's real. The noises are closing in, and I grab my rifle, preparing to fire a warning shot off in the air, in case they came too close. Something about this laughter, how far in I was, the noise earlier, and the time of night, told me that this was not just another family strolling through. I was on edge enough already, but then I noticed that the nightlight was dead quiet. Even the wind was making no noise. I decided enough was enough. I unzipped the tent and fired a shot into the night. I sat there and surveyed the tree line and saw nothing. Listened intently to my surroundings, no laughing, and the forest sounds had returned. Relaxing just a bit and figuring that scared whoever off, I sat down and in my exhausted state, I fell asleep. I woke up later in a cold sweat, racked with anxiety, and it was still dark outside. I immediately hear two people whispering not too far from my tent. Alert, grab my rifle and listen to what they're saying. I can't make out much, but I hear something about being lost, so I shout, "Hey, who's there?" The voices fall silent. I shout again, "Are you guys lost? Who's there?" Suddenly, a huge burst of flame, like a flamethrower, erupted from the middle of the clearing, illuminating several silhouettes of people just standing around. In shock, I fire my rifle, blowing a hole in front of my tent, and it goes dark. Without checking my surroundings, I get up and sprint out of my tent, making a hard left back to where the trail was. I hiked until sunrise back to my truck, with my head over my shoulder the entire way. Never heard anyone follow me, never saw anyone or anything the whole day, but couldn't shake the feeling I was being watched. After that, my enjoyment of camping alone left me, like I left all my gear in the woods that night. I recently moved in with two of my friends, and in the past 2 or 3 months, I've experienced some unexplainable things in my room. For context, my roommates are a couple, and as such share a bedroom on the main floor of the house. The basement is finished, and I have a fairly large room in the back corner. The house itself isn't really scary or anything, and I wouldn't necessarily say that I got that typical feeling of dread during any of these experiences. They've all happened fairly late at night, usually as I'm drifting to dreamland or already asleep. Here are the most prevalent ones. I always fall asleep on either of my sides. I'm a girl with fairly long hair, which I always part off-center on the side. I know this probably doesn't seem relevant, but it will help me explain why I think someone or something was there with me. I stayed up fairly late, and as I was starting to doze off this particular night, something touched my hair, enough to bring me back to full wakefulness. At first, I thought that because of how far my part is to the side, that gravity had eventually taken over a large piece of it, and it slid down across the part. I reached up to move it back, only to find that my part was still intact, and that side of my hair was tucked behind my ear. I got a minor feeling of unease, but was very tired and started to fall back asleep. Right as I was about to reach full sleep, it happened again, this time a little less gentle. It was a similar feeling to just slightly running your fingers through the top part of your hair to sweep it out of your eyes. Again, I was woken up, but still didn't feel scared or unsafe, just unsettled. Nothing else happened that night. In a very similar circumstance, I had just turned off the TV, set my alarm, and put my phone on the side table. I got all my blankets situated and rolled onto my side, so I was now facing the nearest wall. On the side my back was facing, I felt the very recognizable sensation of someone sitting down on the edge of my bed. Again, I didn't feel unsafe, but a little creeped out. I decided to look over my shoulder, and you guessed it, nothing was there. This happened last night, and while I didn't feel horrified, it's definitely the event that made me most uncomfortable and a little bit scared. I listen to the app Calm every night as I'm falling asleep. Either a story, gentle music, or white noise sounds. Last night, I had chosen the city rain option. I woke up sometime during the night to a tapping sound, which probably woke me because it sounded different enough from the rain. To me, it sounded similar to when a girl has acrylic nails and is texting. For some reason, I knew I didn't want to open my eyes, but I did anyway. In my blurry sleep vision, coupled with not having my contacts in, I saw what I think was a man wearing a suit standing next to my night table, positioned so that he wasn't right next to the bed, but the table was in between him and the bed. One hand was at his side, and the other was tapping my phone with one finger. I quickly shut my eyes, and when I opened them, he was gone. The tapping sound was still there, but gradually merged back with the rain sounds, making me feel crazy. It's been hard to digest this dining experience, and not in the ways you might think. I've been trying to make sense of it and to find others who have experienced something similar. But at the end of the day, all I've come up with is loose rumours. I know it was real, and I know it was out there, but that's all I got so far. Back in February, I was stood up on a date. I'd dressed up all nice and brought her flowers. She just texted me that she'd met someone, not even 20 minutes before we were supposed to meet. I'm thinking she'd been juggling several people at once and decided to settle on someone else. No matter the reason, I was left with a bouquet of sunflowers and nothing to do. As I was walking home, I decided I was going to treat myself. In the immortal words of RuPaul, if you can't love yourself, how the hell are you going to love somebody else? That's how I ended up outside the Cardinal's secret kitchen. This was the kind of place I'd always passed by. It was just out of sight enough to be out of mind, and I'd never thought about going there before. It looked a bit too fancy, and it had this intimidating maitre d' outside. A hawk-nosed woman who stared at me as I considered checking the place out. But I was fired up. I wanted to do something different. Break some molds. Be risky. Go out of my way to try something new. So I thought, what the hell, and stepped up. If I just thought about it, I would have realised I'd never seen this place before in my life. Table for one? She asked. Yeah, how? If one's available, yeah. She looked knowingly at my bouquet of flowers and gave me a wry smile. I'm sure we can arrange something. Please come with me. Of course. A pity table. We followed a wide staircase to a set of large double doors leading down into a large cellar. It was this wide open space with cobblestone walls and marble floors. The first room had a sort of lounge area with an oak-hewn bar and 4 sets of tables spread out across the room. There were already plenty of people there, most of them very much not looking for a table for one. Most of them had their coats on and looked about to leave, some of them bringing meals in doggy bags. Business-like type of people, laughing and drinking. I stepped up to a large metal door as the maitre d' held out her hand. Pardon, she said. No phones in the dining area. She pointed to a small sign on the side of the door. A little phone with a red circle and a cross. Of course, I smiled, like an idiot. Where do I... She held out a little silver tray, which I put it on. We can charge it for you while you dine if you wish. Sure, thanks. Absolutely. If you just keep going to the next room, Antonio will meet you. I thanked her as I stepped through the doors. I actually thanked her. As I walked through the door, I came into a dining area. It was a long room about 50 by 30 feet, with an identical metal door on the other side. I realized I was still carrying my bouquet of blue sunflowers, so I dropped them in a little garbage can by the door. There were 8 tables in total, 4 on each side of a red carpet. There were thin mirrors on the side of the wall, as if to simulate slim basement windows. The large door swung shut behind me rather forcefully. The dining hall was full of dinner guests, most of which seemed to be waiting for their order. I did as I'd been told, and just kept going straight through. I opened the door on the opposite side. Another room, almost identical. This place seemed larger than I thought. I could have sworn it would have one main room, and at most one side room. This seemed excessive. Then again, I'd never been there before. Still, I'd lived in this town for 7 years, and never heard anyone even mention it. Another 50 by 30 feet of dining area. There were a bit fewer guests in the second room, but no waiter, so I just kept going. There was no Antonio coming to meet me, so I figured there was a room even further off. There was yet another door on the opposite side of the room after all. Just how big was this place? I noticed some of the guests were giving me side eyes, as if I'd stepped into something private. At the moment, I wasn't really paying attention, but thinking back on it, I think at least half of them were taken in foreign languages. Just as I was about to step through the next door, it opened. 2 guests stepped out, carrying a paper bag. A doggy bag, like the ones I'd seen in the lounge. Figured I was on the right track. But as I stepped through and the door closed behind me, I realized something was off. The third room, identical to the other two, was completely empty. Not a single dinner guest. 50 by 30. The same type of tables and everything, but empty of people. I thought I'd stepped into some place I shouldn't have, like it was closed off for some reason. I turned around to head back, thinking I might have missed something. But the room I just came from was also empty. I just stopped, as my heart skipped a beat. I was standing in the doorway between 2 identical empty rooms, looking back and forth. I was having trouble wrapping my brain around it. I was sure there'd been people there. It was messing with my head. Had I been turned around somehow? Had I imagined it? "Hello?" I called out. I'm looking for Antonio." No answer. Just these 2 beautiful rooms full of dimly lit tables. I could hear my voice bounce off the cobblestone walls. I decided to go back to ask for directions. Bother or not, I was getting uncomfortable. I walked through the room I came from, now empty, and opened the door on the other side. Again, an empty room. The room looked identical, no matter which side you were coming from, and it was messing with my head. Standing in the doorway, I couldn't tell where I'd come from, and now it was all empty. I turned around towards what I knew to be backwards. It had to be, and I just started walking. Through another door, into another empty room. Another door, another room. Yet another door, and yet another room. I could feel my pulse rising as I started to jog. Another door. Another. Another. All leading to the same kind of empty room with the same cobblestone walls. The jog turned into a run and then a sprint. I didn't stop until I collapsed against one of the doors, gasping for air. I must have run through 20 doors. I figured I'd gone insane. Something must have broken inside of me. Maybe I was having some kind of seizure. I collapsed against one of the doors, trying to catch my breath. There was a garbage can on each side of the room, placed in an identical way. Out of exhaustion, I checked it. My blue sunflower bouquet was in there. How? I dropped it in the first room. This wasn't it. I picked it up and clutched it to my chest like a teddy bear. This was impossible. What I was experiencing was impossible. There was no way this place was so big, and there was no way everyone would just decide to collectively leave. Counting the petals on the bouquet, I started thinking that maybe the place itself was crazy, and not me. If I was sane enough to calmly count, to think things through, maybe I wasn't the problem. The maitre d' had taken my phone. That could be a coincidence. Then again, even if she hadn't, I might not have got coverage underground anyway. But it got me thinking. Maybe there was some sort of method to this madness. What did they want from me? As I kept walking forward, I started noticing little changes. The tablecloths were a darker shade, and the red carpet started to look black. There were irregularities on the floor, making me almost trip over my own feet. The mirrors on the wall were less reflective, until they were just glass. The cobblestone patterns were changing room by room, going from even sizes to these absurd and almost biological shapes. The simple dining room chairs were changing into stools, office chairs, and even a beanbag at one point. It seemed the further I went, the less the place resembled a dining room hall, like I was going further and further away from what it was supposed to look like. Devolution, in a way, one room at a time. I tried turning around, but it seemed that whatever direction I went was still forward. Good thing I had my bouquet to comfort me. I must have wandered around for hours. My feet were killing me, so at one point I sat down at one of the tables. That's when I noticed there was a servant's bell. I stood right back up. I was sure it hadn't been there. I'd seen hundreds of iterations of this room, and there'd never been any bells. Had it appeared as I sat down? As I put my hand over it, I considered what to do. Whoever led me into this must have anticipated me ringing that bell. It was part of their plan. And while I didn't know much of their plan, I knew for a fact that it couldn't be anything good. These were not caring people. Or they wouldn't have put me in this position to begin with. This had to be nefarious, one way or the other. So no, I wouldn't ring the bell. Not without planning. I had no idea what to believe, but I had to expect the worst. One of the dining room chairs had been replaced with a bar stool, held up by a large metal pipe going down the middle. It was a bit wobbly, so I managed to pick it apart. I would feel a lot better ringing that bell if I was armed with a hefty chunk of metal. But I took it one step further. I pulled down the lights on both sides of the room, turning the room from dimly lit to pitch black. I took off my shoes as they clacked against the floor. They couldn't hear me in just my socks. Now I feel ready. Someone had to answer for this. I rang the bell. I hid behind the door as I heard the metal hinges squeal. I was fully committed to just beating the shit out of whoever stepped through, but something stopped me. The way they talked just sounded weird. Their steps were large and meaty, like slapping a large steak against stone over and over. Long, heavy steps. Also, a sort of crackling noise. A paper bag, like the doggy bags. I just stood there listening. I snapped out of it as I heard this awful moan, followed by a pair of heavy arms slamming into the table with the bell. The sound of heavy meat being flung onto a stone slab. Whoever or whatever that was, I wasn't going to hit it with a pipe. No way. Instead, I just stepped out onto the carpet and felt around for the door handle. There was something wet on the floor where that thing had stepped. As soon as I touched the handle, I heard a muffled voice. It came from somewhere low, possibly inside something. The shrill voice of a young man panicked. There! He's there! As I pulled the door open, I expected the dining room again, possibly with minor changes, like things had gradually changed over time so far. But no, this looked like the original room. There were even a few guests, just 3 of them spread out among the tables. My first feeling was this intense relief, but it got stuck in the back of my throat. Something was off with these people. One of them, a man in his early 50s, didn't have any eyes. Next to him was a young man in her 20s, sporting a pearl necklace made of eyeballs. In the very back was an older woman, missing her lower jaw. They all turned their heads towards me, grabbed their silverware, and stood up. Behind me, from the door I just passed through, I could hear meaty steps coming. I just ran, flailing my pipe against anyone coming even close. I clocked the middle-aged man on the side of the head, collapsing him over one of the tables. He didn't even scream. He made no sound whatsoever, not even acknowledging that I'd hit him. I could hear the door open behind me as I burst forward, crashing through to the next room. Just a single guest. A kid, no more than 7 years old, chewing on an ear. Flickering lights made it look like he moved in stop motion. On the other side of the room, the garbage can had been knocked over, revealing a pile of paper bags. I just ran. The kid was nowhere fast enough to get close to me. I could hear his lips smack as he kept snacking on the ear like a dog. As I passed the pile of paper bags, I could hear voices coming from them. Sad, desperate voices. Wait, come back, take me with you. Wake me, please. I just kept going, my heart pounding. Not so much from the running, but the absolute panic. The feeling that no matter how far I ran, and no matter which direction I went, I was going the wrong way. I was just going further and further out as the Cardinal's secret kitchen was slowly starting to forget what it was supposed to look like. After another 12 rooms, I could no longer hear the steps behind me. Then again, it wasn't as if there were many places to hide. It just had to keep going forward. It'd catch up to me soon enough. The guests were fewer and fewer. It was as if they appeared more frequently the closer I got to the waiter. Antonio, I guess. I had no idea what time it was. All I knew was that I was exhausted. I decided I'd go 50 rooms in total before I stopped to rest, just to put some kind of distance between me and whatever was out there. After 40 rooms, I called it quits. By now, the dining room was barely recognizable. The cobblestone walls now looked like red tendrils, and the ceiling was so low I could just barely stand up straight. The tables were just slabs of stone sticking out of the ground, covered in some kind of plastic sheet. The ground, which had turned to dirt. The red carpet had turned into a puddle of muddy water, and the garbage cans were just hollow pieces of log. Nevertheless, I collapsed in a corner of the room. I listened for footsteps, but couldn't hear anything. I grabbed the plastic sheets from the tables and covered myself in them. My bouquet of blue sunflowers leaned against the wall along with my metal pipe. My hands were cramping from holding them so hard. I couldn't imagine myself falling asleep in that place, but I did. I got a few minutes here or there. After what felt like a night of rest, I got up. Thinking it was all a bad dream, my heart sank as I opened my eyes. I was still there. This was my reality. The Cardinal's secret kitchen was still there. This was my reality for at least 6 days. Going from room to room, seeing it morph and change over time. At one point it was a forest. At another point it was a sinking ship. I managed to find some edible bark on a tree that had replaced a garbage can. At one point, I walked through what looked like a travel booking agency of some kind, complete with brochures. It wasn't even readable brochures, just symbols that sort of looked like an alphabet. Like the place was just trying to emulate something to an approximate. I did hear footsteps at times. When I did, I broke the lights, or whatever equivalent was there, and hid. As soon as I slipped past the waiter, I'd run through the door and just keep going. No matter what I heard, that muffled voice scream at me. The carpet was often replaced with a ditch or a puddle of water, so I did have something to drink. It did have a faint whiff of ammonia, but when you've literally crawled from room to room, looking for moisture, you stop caring. My sweat-soaked clothes were cutting into my skin, and I'd gotten dozens of rashes. I tied my socks into a makeshift bandana to keep sweat out of my eyes. I'd picked up tablecloths along the way to make myself a sort of bag. This allowed me to pick up little things of use, like ashtrays, loose rocks, firewood, and similar things. I was shaking from exhaustion as I stepped through another door. That was the one thing that never changed, the door. The same metal door, the same metal handle. I'd examined it for hours, looking for patterns or clues. There was nothing, just a door. But this time, I stepped into a train. A night train. 4 sets of seats, next to 4 sets of windows. It was fresh. The seats were soft, and the rhythm of the track was almost hypnotic. It took me a full 10 seconds to realize I wasn't alone. On the other side of the room was a woman. She looked about my age. Unlike other guests I'd seen, she didn't look like a complete horror. There were no missing limbs, no threat. She was just reading a pocketbook, paying me no attention. As I walked up to her, she put it aside and met my eyes. Suddenly, she looked concerned. Are you alright? She asked. No, I huffed, clearing my throat. I'm not alright. What happened to you? You look awful. I I'm not proud of it. I just broke down sobbing. Talking again made me feel like a person, like there was a chance I might make it out of there. It reminded me that I had something to lose and that I was a victim. Despite me looking like absolute shit, she hugged me and comforted me. I broke down in the middle of the train car, just bawling my eyes out. Holding her tight, I felt my salty tears soak into her hair. A person. A living person. She could help. Do you have a phone? Can you call the police? I cried. Sure, sit down, please. You want me to fetch an attendant? No, please, just call them. Don't go. Alright, no problem. Where was your stop? I don't even know where... Footsteps. My single thought was, no. Not again. Not now. Not when I found someone. The meaty steps were getting closer. I grabbed her hand and pulled her out of her seat, and she almost dropped her phone. What are you... He's coming, I cried. Please, we have to go. Let go of me, you're... The door on the opposite side of the room opened. A large black silhouette resembling the image of a man, covered in some kind of slick back goo, holding a doggy bag in his left hand. Impossibly long fingers, with at least 6 joints bending in both directions. It was so tall that it leaned its head to the side just to fit in the room. It held up its paper bag as if pointing it towards me. There, the bag wheezed. He's there! Come on, I screamed. Come on! She tore away from me and pressed herself against the window. Clearly, she was more afraid of me than what was coming towards us. It was as if she couldn't see it. I reached out to her, but she just screamed and fought me off. The thing, the waiter, was coming towards me with long, multi-jointed legs. Meaty steps slapping onto the carpet, leaving black footprints behind. I couldn't stay. I couldn't drag her along. I just had to keep going. Door, door, door. Room after room after room. I was growing more and more exhausted. Not only physically, but I was losing my will to run. Help was long gone by now. I was trying to convince myself that maybe they weren't all bad. Maybe they wouldn't kill me. Maybe they could be reasoned with. Finally, as I collapsed into a room looking like an approximation of a 40s roadside diner, I just couldn't get up. I tried crawling forward, but as I reached the door on the opposite side, I couldn't go on. The waiter opened the door behind me, on the opposite side of the room. Finally, the bag wheezed. Finally, he's done. They were right. I was. With a final effort, I grabbed the metal garbage can by the door to try and pull myself up. Instead, I just knocked it over, spilling paper bags all over the floor. Bags, moving just slightly, whispering for me to take them along. I just collapsed back onto the floor, preparing myself to die right there on the clean floor of a copycat diner. I noticed I'd fallen on my makeshift bag and crushed my now dried bouquet of blue sunflowers. The petals were barely hanging on, but some still were. With a desperate effort, I looked through whatever trash I'd picked up along the way, but there was nothing to save me. I couldn't beat this thing with a pipe or a rock. This thing was a monster. As the creature loomed over me, I could barely hear my thoughts. My blood was running through my mind, pounding at the back of my eyes. There was a sound coming from my throat, like my body wanted to scream more than my mind did. I grabbed the closest things I could, and I shielded myself. The worst part was the waiting, not knowing what would happen. But nothing happened. I looked up. The thing was just looking down at me, holding that paper bag in one hand. Hello. This time, the sound was coming from the creature itself. I noticed I was clutching one of the paper bags from the garbage can. That was the first thing I'd grabbed. I could feel a faint outline of a face through the paper. Hello, I said. I'll take this to go. It just looked at me. My mind was just 1,000 miles an hour. I was trying to figure out 4 different ways to run at once, but my body wasn't listening to me. Here, for your trouble. I handed it my dried bouquet of blue sunflowers. It gingerly picked it up with 2 fingers, studying it with intent. Hello? It pondered the gesture, studying the flowers, and just walked right past me. I laid there, counting my breaths. The footsteps kept going. Gone. Clutching the paper bag to my chest, I stepped through the door. All of a sudden, I was outdoors. A February night, just outside the double doors leading to the Cardinal Street kitchen. My aching bare feet were inches into fresh snow, and the wind was howling. I opened the bag just to find a sealed container with fresh chicken tikka masala. I barely remembered what happened next. I fumbled my way into a corner shop, begging for them to call the police. I remember a patrol woman asking me questions about my whereabouts. Apparently, I'd been reported missing. After my attempt at an explanation, they labelled it a kidnapping. But of course, nothing came of it. There is no such place as the Cardinal Street kitchen. There never was. That cellar is just part of an industrial warehouse. It had never been a kitchen or social club of any kind. While the investigation didn't lead anywhere, I've since heard rumours. There are people online who have taken pictures of it. The same maitre d', the same doors leading to the same lounge. Hell, some people talk about their friends going missing after texting about the place, but no one else seems to have come out of there and lived to tell the tale. I think that to escape the Cardinal's secret kitchen, I had to do what was the least expected of me. To act like a guest. Like I was supposed to be there. If the woman I met on the train is out there, I'd love to talk to her. To explain and to apologise. If she reads this by any chance, I'm sorry. And if you pass by this place anywhere in your travels, just don't. Just walk away. So I'll get right to it. About 10 years ago, when I was about 16, I used to babysit for a family. Their daughter was about 1 or 2 years old when this happened. I'll call her Ellie. So the day of the incident, I decided to take Ellie out for a walk in her stroller. It was in the middle of the day in the summer and in a really nice neighbourhood. So neither Ellie or me had any reason to feel anxious or scared about working there. There were people out in their gardens, etc. Well, me and Ellie had been walking out for about half an hour, and we had come to a part of the neighbourhood which I hadn't been in before. All of a sudden, it feels as if I got a shower of ice-cold water, and at the same time, Ellie started to look uncomfortable in the stroller, whining a bit. The feeling did not disappear, and I just felt this awful feeling of dread. I continued walking, and around the next bend, there was a smaller open field. At this field, there was an old Norse and Viking burial site. I live in Sweden. Practically just some big stones in a formation. The feeling of dread did not disappear, but rather became worse the further I walked. The best way to describe it was like pure hate, like we weren't welcome at this place. It felt like I was walking in a dark alley in the middle of the night, in some really sketchy place. I frantically kept looking over my shoulder, expecting to get attacked or something. Ellie also started acting more and more strange, as if she was scared and uncomfortable. After about 10 minutes of this, I couldn't take it anymore, so I just turned and went back from where we came. When we got about 20 meters from the field with the burial site, Ellie started hysterically screaming, looking straight at a hedge we were passing, as if she saw someone in there. I picked her up and held her on the arm closest to the hedge, and she was like throwing herself towards my other arm to get as far away from the hedge as possible. The thing is, I could see through the hedge and there wasn't anything there. Not even like a cat or anything. She kept looking straight as we passed it, still in full-blown panic mode. When we came to the field, she motioned towards the stones, looking at me and then back to the stones. Still, there wasn't anything in sight. I could actually see how she followed something with her eyes. I was so fucking scared at this point, and at the same time, trying to act normal to try and calm Ellie down. The weirdest thing was that when we came to the exact spot where it felt like I got a cold shower, all feelings of dread and fear disappeared. Like from 100 to 0, from one step to the next. Not only for me, but Ellie also went from panic to calm at the exact same moment. She wanted to sit in her stroller again and was her normal, happy self. Anyone in here who has any idea what this could have been? It's been 10 years, and I still haven't dared to step foot in that part of the neighborhood again. I've never experienced such a strong feeling of dread, like something just hated us being there.